we know this from neuroscience now, that we can interrupt even the most entrenched neural pathways. And in their interruption, there's a space to experience something new. Clowning is the greatest interrupter that I know of patterns that I've experienced. It creates a little bit more space between us and this very powerful identification we have with it. That's just how I am. I am this. I am that, right? Oh no, that's a pattern I have. Oh, look, there it is again. Oh, how fascinating. Oh, it just showed up again. So, really, for me, I think that's the liberatory potential of the clown.
Welcome to the Clown Spirit Podcast. And here's your clowntastic host, Mr. Barnaby King.
Hello. My guest on this week's Clown Spirit Podcast is Karine Bell, founder of Rooted Global Village. The cool thing about Kareen is that she is both a very high-level and experienced community organizer and a clown. She had already been a somatic experiencing practitioner, a facilitator, an anthropologist, and much more for many years before she discovered clowning. But when she did, she immediately realized the relevance and the power that clown practice had to her own work. Clowning became a kind of mirror where she suddenly realized what it truly meant to be vulnerable, authentic, and connected, and when she wasn't being those things in her work and in her life. Among many things she talks about, perhaps the most exciting is the potential of clowning to be a disrupting tool, to disrupt, to interrupt entrenched patterns, either on a sociological, societal level or on an individual psychological level. Her ongoing commitment to training as a clown demonstrates exactly what this podcast is all about, that clowning is relevant to so many different areas and walks of life. It's an essential tool that can help us overcome the many challenges that humans and the more than human are encountering right now at this moment in time. So let's go ahead and get into it. Kareen, first of all, thank you so much for joining me on the Clown Spirit Podcast.
Thank you for the invitation. I appreciate it. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, and welcome to the clown world. You're not a stranger to this clown world, as it turns out. You actually have quite a lot of experience of clowning.
I don't know if I would say a lot of experience, but I am deeply in love with the clown and I have some experience for sure. And I am continuing on that journey now.
You're speaking to people who are also in love with the clowning. That's all my whole audience.
Good. I'm in good company.
You're in great company. And we're going to get to that. The point, really, the central point of my podcast is to create these webs of where does clowning connect? Because I feel like there's a lot of practices out there in the world that are about healing trauma and about creating new possibilities of how we can live more healthy, more balanced lives in a world, that people are out there doing that work, and that somehow clowning, even though it's not always called, seems to be there a lot of the time in various of those kinds of practices. And I want to talk about those connections with you. But first, could you give us, like in a nutshell, who are you and what do you do?
Yeah, sure. It's really funny because my daughter often tells me, when people ask me what you do, I often don't really know what to tell them. And I'm like, yeah, baby, that's totally spot on because I don't really often know what to tell people either. And part of me is loath to give introductions and bios because I always feel like there's some resistance I always have to defining myself. I'm sure you can imagine what I'm talking about. That said, it does help to orient oneself in the world. So I guess what I do right now in the world, that the most sort of forefront thing that I do is I am the founder and creative director of a space called the Rooted Global Village. And in this space, we are like a community of people, although I do resist usually using that word community, which is something I could probably weave into our conversation here about clowning because I think it's relevant. I rather say we're an assemblage of people that are on our way to community or on our way to building what might be called the commons to come. But on the road to that, there's a lot that needs to happen in terms of grappling with the wounds of relationship we've experienced, grappling with all of the inherited ways of being in the world that come in and act as barriers to relationship. There's just a lot in the field when it comes to bringing people together in an attempt to heal division or to work with the polarities that exist in the world and that really keep us steeped in separation and alienation and kind of fragmentation, like hallmarks of modernity. But we're trying to counter that. We're a space that's attempting to counter those forces and weave relationship. And that's the thing that I do most. That's the primary role I have right now. But my background is also in somatic experiencing. So I trained in that. If for anyone who's not familiar, it's a trauma healing modality, the kind of the roots of which are really steeped in kind of indigenous cosmological approaches to healing. So it's very interesting once you get into the essence of what this technique is about. It's rather about collecting the spirit, the parts of ourselves that have been fragmented from trauma, various forms of trauma. Then I also I have a master's in social and medical anthropology. So I was always really interested in culture. I was interested in the way that culture shapes us. And I had an insatiable curiosity, even from a really young age, to understand how I came to know myself in the world and how others came to know themselves in the world and what the influence of culture was in that sense. And that was a very personal journey for a big part of my life, growing up with the particular mother that I had who was in the medical field and having to overcome a lot of ways in which my early experiences were pathologized in a very particular way that brought a lot of shame into my life. And so, for whatever reason, I had some little part of me that was always guiding me towards understanding the context in which I was shaped and my experience was shaped. And that led me to study anthropology. Before that, I studied comparative religion and mysticism. I'm very drawn to mystical traditions.
Amazing. And I can understand why that might be difficult for your daughter or son to understand because
Yeah,
there's a lot going on there, or
yeah.
anybody. But I want to just pick up on a thread or two there that sort of intrigued me, if I may,
Please.
before we make our way to the clown
Mm-hmm.
connections. I'm interested in this root of somatics, which suggests body, soma, body,
Mm-hmm.
and then but you mentioned spirit when you were talking about somatics, and you mentioned indigenous
Mm.
wisdom as well, and this spiritual, mystical element. So could you speak a little bit to how does somatics as a bodily practice or focus, what is the relationship there with spirit and mysticism and indigenous wisdom?
It's funny. I was just speaking to a friend of mine recently, and we were talking about a lot of these different modalities that one can learn. It's like you're learning a skill, and that skill becomes something that you can apply in the world, and it can help facilitate maybe some relational dynamic or a group dynamic. And it's funny, every time I study something, I just went through a deep democracy training. And at some point during that training, I said, I can really see how, at heart, this is a spiritual practice. And I think when I come to that understanding, I come to it every time I realize that there's something in the practice of what we're doing, the way we're focusing, the way we're oriented, what we're tending in that moment, that feels like it's tending the field of relationship. It's opening our heart or opening our perceptual field. It's doing something that can shift what maybe no longer serves us or what has been the energy or the spirit of trauma in some form in our experience. There, for me, somatic practice, somatic experiencing, when I was learning it, it's very actually quite, in a way, esoteric conceptually. So you're a practitioner and your whole purpose is to invite someone into this kind of relational field. You're holding this field open for them. And they say in somatic experiencing that whenever you experience a trauma vortex opens up, but simultaneous to that, a healing vortex opens up. And yeah, it's really working with this kind of idea that when the one exists, its opposite also exists, right? So the trauma appears and then the healing appears. And the idea is that the ways that the body is wise and intelligent and knows how to work with the unmetabolized energy that is produced in the experience of trauma that then needs to be bound by the body. And the idea is that in that relational dynamic between the practitioner and, let's say, the other person who is coming for healing, the practitioner holds open the space that your body knows what it needs to do to heal. That if you were able to lean into and trust the threads that are emerging within the dynamic, the body would find its own way to unravel the trauma. Somatic experiencing is about trusting other forms of intelligence that maybe traditional Western psychology doesn't pay any attention to. Mm-hmm. Really drawing from the unconscious, understanding that there are ways that are often even mysterious to us about how the body has encoded some memory, but that we can trust that if we go there, as irrational as it may seem in a moment to, like, I don't know, let me give you an example. I was myself receiving some healing once. I have a somatic experiencing practitioner myself. And I was in this session once, and this was quite some years ago now. And when I brought my awareness to my body, I noticed that my right shoulder was really stiff, right? And it was like up and tense. And now there might be a way in which we could will ourselves to just let go of that energy, but we don't necessarily do that in somatic experiencing. We bring our awareness to that. Okay, my shoulder is like this right now. It's high, it's tense. And as I stayed with it, I was invited to stay with that sensation for just a moment, long enough to see what emerges as I stay there. And in somatic experiencing, because we trust what arises that might not seem totally rational, I trusted this moment when all of a sudden I had this impulse to throw my arm as if I were throwing a baseball. To, like, literally, I had the picture of someone throwing a baseball and the urge, like the physical urge to move my arm as if I were throwing a baseball. Now, I don't like baseball. I don't play baseball. I've never played baseball. I don't plan on playing baseball. You see where I'm going with this? I guess what I'm trying to say is, in any other context, in any other moment, that if I had even noticed that thought or noticed that image, I wouldn't have paid any attention to it. But because I was in the context of somatic experiencing, and I have learned that it doesn't have to make sense to me to follow it. So I stayed with that image and I said, I feel like I need to throw this baseball. So we did that. And we're encouraged, if we're going to enact a movement, we're encouraged to do it very slowly. So it really helps us stay with and integrate that experience and not override it with too quick of a movement. So I did that maybe 4 times, really slowly. I threw a baseball. And then it was just like a pop. And all of the tension released. I don't know where it went. I don't know why it went. I don't know why it was there in the first place. And none of that matters. Somehow that, for me, is one of the most beautiful, mystical things about, like, a healing modality, like somatic experiencing, or even some of the other somatic practices that we work with. There is a realm of mystery involved in what we encounter in the practice, what we follow in the practice, and what can emerge from the practice. And I love that about it.
That's such a beautiful example. Do you practice as a somatic practitioner now still, like one-to-one, is it mostly, or with groups?
Yeah, I haven't been doing one-to-one for a little while. And so usually some of the somatic experiencing elements come in group work more so than in one-on-one client work at the moment.
So I'm curious now about this connection to Rooted Global Village, because a bit like me, like I started as a clown and as a clown teacher, and then I've moved into this kind of digital community creation or something like that. And I'm holding this space for clowns, and it feels like you're doing something similar. You started from as this practitioner, but you've moved into being a social entrepreneur and creating an organization and trying to hold virtual space, which includes having a platform for other teachers and other practitioners. What was it that took you in that direction towards being more than just a somatic practitioner, or
Mm.
shifting from that into this more community building modality?
This actually rooted actually began on the heels of an event that I had organized in February of 2020. It was called the Embodied Trauma Conference. And this particular event for me was very much driven by this desire to help illuminate, especially the ways in which culture can induce experience that you might be akin to trauma. I have to just caveat this to say, I don't love using that word trauma very much anymore. I'm much more focused on liberation, but that's where it began. It was like trying to help contextualize experiences that we have that we don't even necessarily wouldn't necessarily categorize as something that could be trauma inducing. But I would say for me, I was even more interested in those pre-verbal, even prenatal experiences that are beyond the cognitive mind's ability to understand or access or make sense of. And I was very much interested in the cultural aspects too. Like, for example, the work of someone like Resmaa Menakem. He's also a somatic practitioner, and he has this modality called somatic abolitionism, which is really focused on healing racialized trauma. And I remember at the time, I'm biracial, and my father, he passed away now, but he was a Black man from Mississippi. And Resmaa's work was one of the first bodies of work that helped me understand a little bit more about my father's experience of growing up in the Jim Crow South and what it might have been like, how being a young Black man in the Jim Crow South shaped many of the experiences he had, but also the ways of being that he developed, the ways he coped with it. Yeah, like he had it helped explain some things about my dad that I think without it lacked context and I didn't understand them. And so I had invited Resmaa to this event, and I actually said at the time, it's Resmaa or bust. If he says no, I'm not even going to do it. I was that excited about him being there. And he joined, and it was a 5-day event, and it really shocked me. This was even before everything shut down. It was in February of 2020, so there were whispers of COVID, but we hadn't shut down yet. And I remember 30,000 people registered, almost 30,000 people registered for this event. And I was thinking, what's going on? It's clear that there's something in here that people are interested in. And so we had about 5 days together. And what I was tracking over the 5 days was this, I couldn't quite pinpoint it at first, but then I was like, there's a longing for something that I'm finding throughout this 5-day journey together. And it felt like the longing, the cry for community. There's a beautiful West African elder who's passed now, who said the cry for community is everywhere in the West. And that I felt it there. I felt it in that space. And so that really prompted me to think about, okay, I really enjoyed that. I loved it. I needed it. Like I was longing for that. And so how could we keep this going? We have now a whole bunch of people who, obviously not everyone from that conference joined, but there were a lot of people who were really keen to keep some thread of connection going that we had formed. So we started Rooted. And so it really start with the intention of being a somatic practice space per se. It was just one element of what we were doing. And we actually ended up spending a whole year. We did invite different people in the somatic world to come in. And we basically have guests, teachers, lecturers, scholar activists, practitioners of various kinds come in and offer like a workshop. So we would have folks who were in the somatic world come in and do that. We also did this year-long, we called it a book and body study with Resmaa's book called My Grandmother's Hands. And we did that for a whole year. It was this collective embodied study group, I guess you could say. It was quite large. It was quite a large group. And as part of it were experiential somatic ways of being able to be with the material that we were encountering over the course of the year. So yeah, it's evolved so much from the beginning, really. I don't know about you. I feel like for me, it's what's so important is I often don't know where I'm going with something. I just follow a feeling. And especially when the feeling is really, it's down here, it's in the gut. And it's a very powerful feeling. It feels like something extremely tangible calling me in a particular direction. But the way there, the path is not clear. I just know to walk in a particular direction. It kind of means, though, that it's not like I created something and it never changes and it just stays static. It's always evolving, it's always changing, it's always in this very responsive relationship with the people in the space, events in our world. It's a total project of emergence. And I got to tell you, honestly, there's a part of me that wishes I could just create something and keep going with it. But I am a person who thrives in emergence, even as scary as it can be sometimes,
And that
and the
means that
unknown.
you feel like you jump and to different projects a lot
I
when they
mean,
emerge.
it means, yeah, it's maybe more about a constant practice of listening to maybe what needs to change. So maybe, or what wants to come into the field of rooted to work with, and then what maybe wants to change, what we have to let die so that something new can come through. I think it's a constant experimentation and failure project. We're constantly experimenting and failing. I've really had to embrace that. And I have to say, clowning has helped me embrace that. I think that's been the practice that's really helped me embrace that the most. Because I think in the beginning, I would feel sometimes like I should know what I'm doing, or we should have this figured out. But actually, no, because we're doing something, I think, in rooted. And I think there are other spaces that are definitely doing this too. We're journeying somewhere, right? There's a scholar named Arturo Escobar who talks about the no longer and the not yet worlds to come, right? There's something that's collapsing about the world we've been living in. There's an old way that seems to want to give way to something new. And maybe we could say that's true about every moment of our lives, that we're constantly creating the world through these bodies. And every moment, every choice we make, we're creating the world again. And there's something about that, not knowing what the not yet world to come is. What does it look like? What does it feel like? We don't know. If we're really truly going to attempt to do something different and to imagine worlds that we did not yet experience, then we don't have a blueprint for that. We don't have a map with fixed coordinates for that. We have maybe a system of navigation that is rooted in our values, the values we hold for the kind of world we'd want to live in, but the rest is a mystery. And that, I think, inherently means that we're signing ourselves up for experimentation and failure.
I do hope that you're really enjoying this Clown Spirit podcast interview. My name is Barnaby King. I'm the founder and the director of Clown Spirit. And I hope you won't mind me just taking a moment out of this podcast to very briefly tell you about Clown Spirit Village. This is our innovative and totally unique offering. If you want to bring clowning into your life, if you want to enhance your clowning, we help you do that in many different ways. We have masterclasses once a month with the best clown teachers from around the world. We have a whole library of pre-recorded resources online for you, including 3 whole clown courses that you can access immediately. We have links, book chapters, videos, websites, resources that you have instant access to. And then, perhaps most valuable of all, we have weekly coaching sessions at different times that you can tune in on. They're small group sessions that you can jump in on at any time and bring your questions, your thoughts, ideas, bring pieces that you're working on to get feedback. You can use these coaching sessions however you want. They're very personal, interactive. You get real artistic, creative, and life coaching out of those sessions. So check out Clown Spirit Village. The link is in the notes below. It's really about nurturing your inner child, your inner creativity, your inner clown. And crucially, it's being part of a clown community that is supportive and nurturing. Thanks for listening. Now let's get back to that interview. You just made the segue quite nicely for me into clowning. And I suppose there are different ways we could talk about. On one level, clowning becomes a metaphor for other things in our lives. As you just mentioned, the idea of failure and coping with failure in other areas. And it's almost like we're learning metaphorically there from the clown and applying it. And then there's the level at which clowning as a practice, as a physical practice, might inform your somatics work. And I wonder, though, if we could just begin with actually the story of how did you get into clowning in the first place? What was your route? Speaking of route, what was your route, spelt differently, into clown?
It's really funny. We were still living in Switzerland, and I think it was maybe when I'd known about clown school. I'd heard there were clown schools right before. And I remember even then thinking I'd love to do that. Not really necessarily knowing why or what I would be signing up for. It was just a feeling. So I was still in Switzerland, and we knew we were moving to Los Angeles. And I think as soon as I knew I was moving to LA, I think I had heard of the clown school, or I Googled it or something like that. The clown school in LA, David Bridle is the founder of that school, or the co-founder, I think, of that school. And he teaches a lot of the programs they have. And so I was like, I'm going to do it. But then it was interesting because we moved. And then, of course, our lives were very busy. And I think there was quite a stretch of time that I didn't sign up for any classes, and I had forgotten about it. And then the weird, funny story was we were sitting at the dinner table one night, and I think I tried to make a joke, and it didn't land with my family at all. And my husband just jokingly said, "Just face it, honey, you're not funny." And I was like, "Excuse me?" And I got really mad. I was like, "Excuse me? Yes, I am. I am funny." And I said, "That's it. I'm going to clown school." And I signed up I went online that night. I found David was running a summer intensive for Clown One at the clown school, and I signed up that very night. And I did this intensive, and boy, was it intense. That's really how I got into it.
What was your initial experience in those early classes?
I remember going into it so excited. Like I couldn't wait, because I'm actually at home, like with people who know me, I'm a total goof, like silly as can be, just a nerd through and through. And I love it. I love that side of me. I love to express that side of me. And so I'm thinking, oh, this is going to be fun. Right. It's just going to be pure fun. We're just going to be a big group of people having a laugh for 5 days. And I would say, like in a lot of situations like that, where I don't really know what I'm getting into, but I'm very excited about it. I started off very open, some of the early, I don't know if this is true of a lot of clown schools or not, but David would have us do these marches where he'd put us into groups of 5. And then we'd be given some silly assignment, like you would have 5 minutes to come up with a march, and at the end, put on the greatest show on earth or whatever. And of course, it's an impossible task, and you're only given 5 minutes to figure it out. And it was funny because in the very beginning, I thought, this will be great. Of course, we're going to be silly, and it's not going to be perfect, and it'll be hilarious, and we'll all laugh a lot. And I was so intrigued to notice how very slowly over time, there would be these subtle things that would come up, like comparison with others. Oh, they got more laughs, or you didn't get a laugh, or all these these very subtle dynamics between people, or just that moment of being seen and really witnessing yourself being as seen as you are. I don't know if anything could have prepared me for that, actually. I'm still in awe of what emerged for me. As much therapy and somatics and different practices and ways that I have worked with, that moment, that relational moment of seeing and being seen, I don't even know if I've ever explicitly worked on it like that, but I will say nothing has ever brought it out like clowning. And I started to struggle quite a lot, actually. It was really interesting to notice how, as the week progressed, I slowly felt myself shutting down a little bit more, but also simultaneously becoming insatiably curious about that. Wow, what is this? Like, what is happening here? Because it felt like there was something so deeply intriguing about the nature of those moments of encounter in relationship. I could already see so much potential in a kind of world of exploration and healing around seeing and being seen, and the tenderness in that, the extreme
Yeah.
tenderness.
And the vulnerability, the
Total.
exposure, especially for me anyway, when it's one to many.
Yes.
There's something specific about clowning that in that sense that it's like a lot of the exercises put you on your own in front of a group, and the kind of emotions and anxieties and things that kind of come up in that scenario, and having to not hide them, having to be
Yeah.
allow them to be visible, as you say, be seen.
I had a complete breakthrough. So I did that summer intensive, and then I signed up for Clown One. I'm a glutton for punishment. Like, as soon as I know that that something scares me, I feel like I have to get closer to it. I need to understand the nature of what scares me about this. And I know walking away, I will regret it. I'll regret not having the courage to confront it in some way, or to really to witness it. So I signed up for Clown One, and I did Clown Two, and then I ended up doing kind of a Clown Four. I didn't do Clown Three. It's a longer story than I have for now, but I really struggled through Clown One and Clown Two. Clown One was a little bit was actually okay, but it was Clown Two. We had to develop these characters. So we were working with the Joey and the Augusta clowns, right? And I think there was a point at which we had to, yeah. So the first week we did a Joey, and then we did an Augusta. And I remember the Augusta character, as I'm sure, right, is like the representation, the symbol of that can never get it right, always failing, always awkward, everything I already feel in my most insecure moments, right? And so I remember writing to David, and I was like, I'm feeling a lot of anxiety about this. Like, I don't know how to develop this character. In a way, I already can see the character. I can see those parts of me that are the dramatization of the Augusta. Woe is me, or my doomsday Kareen, I called her. But then there was something else that felt like it wanted to come through. And I wrote to him and I said, like, I feel like I don't know how to do this within a context. And I was referring to the other people in the room, because we have to do, like you said, solo things with these characters. I'm like, and I don't know how I can show this part in a group with a group of people who don't we don't really know each other, and they don't care about me yet. I said something to that effect. They don't care about me yet. Because I remember at one point being so intrigued by this idea that to really experiment and fail and be vulnerable and like truly in our authentic self, like you said, it can be absolutely scary, but within the context of relationship, it feels safer. It might not feel totally safe, but it's safer, because of course we're dealing with a lot of shame in there, in that a lot of us have so much shame that we're working with that can often come to the surface. I've noticed in scenarios like this. And I think I had said at the end of a class one time, I'm like, I understand what it would mean to work with this within the context of, let's say, the village, where everybody knows you already inherently belong. You belong. So there's a way in which you could maybe be seen, and even in moments maybe that are deeply vulnerable and even painful, but that your belonging is never questioned. But we come from a context where our belonging, for many of us, has been in question. We haven't known our belonging truly to each other. And so I'm sitting there, I'm like, how do I do this? They don't care about me. How do I just give that? And he wrote me this answer that to this day, is one of the most exquisite responses. I think I literally go back to this email from time to time just to remember what he wrote. And he basically said that you're completely right. He said something like, but this is the high wire act. It's the risk we take in revealing something. And in the revealing of something, we might actually get what we need in return. The idea, and then he said something along the lines of, if we're waiting for it to be safe enough to show ourselves, then we'll be just that, waiting. And it just hit me like bricks. And it feels, it was such an exquisite answer. And it was kind of like one of those responses that felt like there was such wisdom in it that you already knew that was true. Yeah, of course that's true. My ability to reveal something of myself, something vulnerable in me, is what is going to invite the very relationship that I'm so longing for.
That's so beautiful. It makes me think about how clown workshops often, I think a lot of teachers at pains to create this warm, safe, nurturing container for clowning to happen. And of course, once you're in that workshop where you trust everyone, then it's easy to be goofy and to reveal and be stupid and be funny. But fundamentally, clowning is about, I don't know if maybe that's too categorical of a thing to say, because in indigenous context, clowning would have happened in family and community. So
Yeah,
that's true. That's true. But nowadays, clowning, and I think also for centuries and millennia, especially in the European tradition, clowning is about traveling. And you're, as the clown or the fool, is really an outsider and a voyager and a traveler, and will be moving through different communities and performing in front of people they don't know. So
yeah,
they're in very exposed situations. And that's true, of course, today for anyone who's a street performer, for example, or a professional clown. You're just up in front of people who you have no idea who they are. There's no belonging or community necessarily. And as you say, it's your job to actually create that. You're a creator as a clown of these sort of temporary, fluid gatherings or collections of people, assemblages of people, where your willingness to be vulnerable and trusting them is repaid by that trust coming back at you. And also, I think creating a sense of connection amongst people.
100%. Yeah, 100%. I remember the moment I realized that I got really angry at the truth of it, really the truth of that. And also that it meant that I had to grapple with all of the fear that I had about really embracing that kind of vulnerability, which was, I thought was quite interesting, because I guess I always had thought of myself before that. I thought of myself, and it's true that I can be quite vulnerable with people I don't know, but it's not always true, right? And there are moments where I am more guarded than I think I'd like to be. And it surprised me. I was like, oh, I'm not like this open book all the time that can just easily fall into vulnerability and invite people. It's not true. And nor should we always be in that state. I should add, it's not that we should always be vulnerable. But I think it was just surprising to me that, yeah, how in certain moments and experiences with clowning, I just put a wall up and I didn't know how to penetrate that wall. It actually got so intense for me at one point. And it was interesting because I ended up doing a neutral mask workshop with this really wonderful teacher, Emmanuel Delpech, I think is
Yeah,
Emmanuel.
yeah.
She was fantastic. And I was invited by Amrita Dalival, who is part of the
Mhm.
Idiot Workshop in LA. I was invited by her to take this workshop, and I was like, yeah, that's really intriguing. And I didn't know at the time that, is it in Lecoq in the 2-year kind of training arc, that neutral mask is one of the first things you do, and clowning is actually one of the last things you do, which I thought was very interesting. And once I did the neutral mask workshop, it made more sense to me. There was one aspect of it that I found so intriguing. And that was that, if you've done this, right, where you explore the 7 levels of tension, and the neutral mask is, I think it's like the fourth level or something like that. And it's this state of embodied awareness and curiosity. It's like the state of like wonder and curiosity. Like there's enough tension in the body that you are alert and ready. You're like poised and ready, but it's there's not so much tension in the body that you're in that mode of survival or panic or whatever it may be. So I remember we were guided to act as though we were in a jungle, and we were curious about our surroundings. And I can feel it even as I talk about it. The very particular kind of place where you find that in the body, where it lives and how it feels. And I remember when we were doing it, it made me think of somatic experiencing, because when we are in a regulated state, let's say, so we're not in a threat response and we're not in a shutdown response of some kind, a kind of natural state that we would be in, this kind of state of alert awakeness, alertness and curiosity. So instead of, like, when we're in a state of threat, we might try to orient to the danger. Whereas when we're in that state of kind of regulation and kind of calm and connection, we would orient towards, they call it exploratory orienting. So you're curious about the space you're in and you're moving around like this. It's a very present and embodied state. And what I loved about it was we were right in the midst of this kind of clown 4 experience we were having when I had done this workshop on neutral mask. And I loved it so much. When I went back to clowning, there was this one practice that David invited people to do where you have a mirror, there's a mirror on the stage, this kind of semicircle of all the people watching you. And then one person is invited to go up. You stand in front of the mirror, you look at yourself in the mirror, you decide how you feel, figure out how you feel, and then you do a march based on how you feel, along with a soundtrack. You come up with the soundtrack. You make a noise, you do a march, and you have to march across parallel to the group, and then you have to turn and face them and walk towards them. And then you say, and now I feel, and then you say how you feel. And I had avoided doing this solo for a long time. I was dreading this moment. And I know he doesn't force anyone to go up, right? It's completely your choice. But there was something about that moment where I thought, I really feel like tonight's my night. But I started to have that experience one has of ruminating and trying to pre-plan what I'll do, as decide what I'll do when I go up there and what will be funny. And none of this is conscious. It feels like it's a completely automatic kind of stress response, if you will, to try to figure out what you'll do so you feel a little bit safer going into that unknown. So then I paused and I said, you know what? Maybe instead what I'll try to do is I'll try to evoke the neutral mask. I want to, it completely made sense to me why it comes before clown in this moment. So I was sitting in the chair and I took a breath, I closed my eyes, and then I just awoke into this landscape. Like when you do the neutral mask, you awake into this landscape. And you're in this new place and you don't know what it is. It's a completely new place. And I had my eyes wide open and I'm looking around and I'm taking things in a way that was as if this was an unfamiliar environment to me. And what it meant is, like, neurophysiologically, what felt like it was being communicated was the sense of like total presence, curiosity, and just like a readiness in my body. Like all the rumination, all the things that were going on beforehand evaporated. And suddenly I was in the state of the neutral mask, awake, alert, and curious, and like wonder. Like the idea that you can evoke a feeling like that, right? Once you've had the experience of dropping into it, was fascinating to me. So I evoked that experience. Sitting in the chair, no one knew what I was doing. And then the one person had sat down and I said, I'm going. And I just got up there. And it was the breakthrough, I think, moment of my clowning. I had gone up, I'd done my march. And at first, I was angry at first because I don't know, I feel like anger was the most accessible emotion to that feeling of, damn it, I'm doing something I don't want to do. And so I said anger. And then once you say that, you go back, you march back with that emotion, you stand in front of the mirror again, you tap into the next emotion, you do the march again, you do a song. So I went out like maybe the 3rd or 4th time, and I was standing in front of the group. I was seeing all of these eyes on me, and I could feel that moment that kind of like anxiety of being seen. And I felt the tenderness of it in that moment, like just really feeling my own kind of tremulous, my own tremulous heart, seeing all these eyes on me. And so David said, "And how do you feel?" And I said, "And now I feel terrified." And he said, "Okay, that's your song." And basically, the invitation was to just sing a song on the spot about how you felt. And just out of nowhere came this song about feeling like I was a little mouse. Oh, no, I think he said first, he said, "Give me a line," or something like that. And I said, or he said, I don't know, no, he said, excuse me. He said, "And when I feel terrified, I feel like and I said, "A little mouse." And he said, "That's your song." So then I just started singing this song about being a little mouse. And I live in a hole in the wall in your house. And I really want to get to know you, but I don't know how to come out. And I want you to see me. It was a whole thing. It was actually filmed because they were making a documentary about clowning, and it's all in film, which is really funny. So I think I get to see it again myself one day. But I'm still in awe of that moment, Barnaby, really, like, because what came after that was probably one of the most raw, authentic expressions of joy and silliness. And yeah, it was a deeply vulnerable moment, but on the other side of it was joy. And I was like mocking people. And I just I was in a kind of a relationship to clowning that I think I had longed to have from the beginning, but that I felt like there was always some barrier to in my own mind. That moment of exposing myself and seeing, as I did that, the way in which all the people who were with me were really moved by it. There were people who were crying. I started crying, and little heart people making hearts at me. And yeah, it was the perfect, I think, example of what David was talking about when he was talking
Yeah.
about what we get back when we give something first.
It's a beautiful story, and thanks for sharing that so evocatively. I wish people could actually have seen you physically demonstrating the story as you were doing it, because you were demonstrating that state of calm curiosity or rooted curiosity. That was lovely. So take us into the world now of how you see this clowning, or how it's playing out for you in terms of the rooted global village work, somatics work, or maybe just your life. Can we start to knit it together back? Because we learn what you do, then we learn how you got into clowning, and I'm sure that the clowning has had an impact.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Yeah. I feel like so much of the work that I'm interested in doing, maybe at the heart of it, I also taught mindfulness for a lot of years, and I have had a very long Buddhist practice. And I see a relationship with all of this. There's something for me about the clown and the clown's potential and the practice of clowning, of disrupting maybe our more entrenched ways of being in our bodies, ways of being in relationship, ways that we think we know ourselves, all of the very practiced patterns of
Yeah.
being in our lives. And I think it's probably, no, everyone probably knows this quite well by now, but modernity has this tendency in our culture. We have a tendency to flatten ourselves and each other into these kind of very fixed identities that can feel immovable. We do it to ourselves, we do it to each other. We root it maybe on some past action or maybe some past experience. And then I become this thing. I'm shy, right? Like I'm an introvert. It becomes this identity that we hold. And it's not to say that we don't have particular preferences, but we can really hold so rigidly sometimes to these identities that we forget that we are or can be these unfolding, mysterious beings that can surprise ourselves. We can surprise each other. And I think that's a thread that I've always, not always in my whole life, but that I've come to through practice and with different modalities through Buddhism. There's a lot of different expressions of that in the world, let's say. This idea that, that we can become fixed in way of being, And so I'm always intrigued by those practices that can disrupt that, can interrupt these kind of rigid
Yeah.
identities, or these kind of more rigid, entrenched ways of being, habituated ways of being in the world, and invite us into other ways of being, whether that be other ways of responding, other ways of being in relationship, other potentials for choice, other possibilities for how we might experience ourselves in the world and each other. And I just saw clowning as one way really to do that. And so in Rooted, we actually just spent a whole year, almost a year, focused on play and the way play can be this liberatory practice, that it can do so much to expand our horizons, our perceptual horizons, and invite us into possibility that we didn't have before.
Yeah, beautiful. I listened to your podcast with Heidi.
Oh yeah.
It was a beautiful episode, and I actually would really, I think I'm going to put a link to it in the show notes. You'll be able to find below this podcast because it's a really beautiful conversation in many ways, and you tell some lovely stories there as well. And one of the phrases that you use a couple of times is this idea of being cracked open.
Mm,
And I just really love this for a number of, it's a beautiful poetic kind of metaphor of the egg breaking, this perfect, beautiful thing that's actually quite strong. But when you crack it, it's suddenly like a disaster. So there's mess everywhere. It's irre and cracks, also the kind of idea of cracks, and that clowns are attracted to those cracks. They love to find them and creep in there and, if possible, expand the cracks until things fall
I
apart.
love that. Yeah.
And I think this evokes this idea that you mentioned earlier of the world that is no longer and the world that is to come as well. Like we have to, clowns, I think, are really good at showing us the cracks, showing us like breaking things apart and showing us why that is no
Yes.
longer working.
Yeah, absolutely. I love the idea, kind of what you're talking about, of what the clown points to that we might otherwise wish to reject. The shadow, right? I love that the idea that the clown is always dancing on the border and can illuminate, can bring to consciousness. This is my understanding, and correct me if you, or please add to it if you have a different understanding, but in a lot of indigenous contexts, that the clown, one of the roles of the clown was to illuminate what the collective might not be seeing, or what an individual, maybe there's a trait that needs, maybe someone's getting a little bit too big for their britches, or something, that there's a dynamic of some imbalance within the community. The clown is that astute kind of dancer on the margins, that can highlight those things, mock them, make what ridicule them, and in so doing bring them to consciousness, bring them into awareness for the person, for the collective. And then in the midst of that, they can be integrated again, right? There's this critical role of illuminating the shadow that I find so intriguing, which is very interesting then to think about how in Western culture, the clown is often feared. A lot of people, obviously you don't, I don't, I love the clown, but I'm also not afraid of the shadow. I find that fascinating, that kind of intriguing, that the clown as a figure in Western culture is often a figure to be feared, if not then made into a horror figure.
Yeah, I agree with you. There's a lot of people complain, oh, the clown has been demeaned and devalued. But I think that the association with those dark energies and that shadow space that makes it scary. So it's logical or understandable on some level. And people's unwillingness to look there,
Yeah.
to look into the face of that dark energy, that, and then we sort of project onto the clown this scary image and we make it all grotesque. But clowns have always been grotesque and scary, actually. They're not sweet and
That's right. That's true. Yeah, that's true. And they might have been, I guess I'm curious about maybe the cultures historically that revered the clown. Even when they were scary, there was a reverence for the role of the clown, like an appreciation, like the fool. I know it could be sometimes maybe a dangerous position to be in if ridiculed the king and that day he didn't like it. But I also know that there was a reverence for the role that the fool or the clown played, right? In that way. I don't remember if it was in a book. It might have been in David's book that I was reading this comment that in ancient Egypt, there was always this understanding that before the solemnity of the ritual, you had to have reverence for the folly. You had to have reverence for folly before the solemnity of the ritual. Like this interplay of polarities between the solemnness and graveness and seriousness of things, juxtaposed to the kind of lightness, disruptive, cataclysmic energy of the clown, so that things never become too rigid. And of course, things don't then always stay in chaos, but the balance of those two polarities is always important. So the clown is necessary. Modernity has one of the critiques of modernity, this outgrowth of the scientific revolution, or the Enlightenment, I should say, sorry, in Europe, and I would say it has roots even going further back. One of the critiques of it is that it's this kind of paradigm of unchecked forces, like this idea in capitalist economics that we should always be growing, growth, accumulation, extraction, these limitless activities that modernity seems to be so keen and fixated on. It lacks the checks and balances that would be inherent in a situation like maybe like an indigenous context where, as soon as someone got too big, I'm thinking of like I think I heard this story once about the San Bushmen, one of the oldest known continuous civil or communities in the world in Africa. I heard this story once that, let's say you have a group of people, if they go out and hunt and they all come back, and if someone got the largest kill, like it was the biggest kill of the day, they would immediately start to make fun of them, right, for having the largest kill. I felt like the moment I heard that story, it made total sense to me why.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like because it's not tenable to have this kind it goes against the kind of balance of within group dynamics to have someone whose ego starts to grow and grow unchecked, and then they begin to dominate. Ridicule, or in the Black community, so doing the dozens. It's like all these little ways of knocking you down to size. Don't forget you're human. I feel
It's
like that's
beautiful.
such a gorgeous role of the clown.
Whenever I've been working in institutions, academic institutions mostly, but also businesses, companies where I've worked, I have always found ways to clown the boss, to make fun of the boss in some kind of formal context in a performance. And it's been a theme, like a through line of my work. And that feels, oh, I'm embodying this ancient function, the clown, which is exciting. But as you say, it's dangerous. It can backlash. And it's questionable. It's always questionable whether it has any impact,
Mm,
because it depends on how you're heard by that person, for example. Do they get it?
yeah,
Do they get on a deeper level? Does it start to make them question or think differently or reflect about how they're acting, how they're behaving? Or is it just like a fun release for everybody and then things go back to normal?
yeah,
King Lear, he's plagued by the fool telling him that he's being foolish all the time, and he doesn't really listen. He doesn't hear the truth until it's too late. And when he does finally hear the truth, it's too late. So
really.
that's a sort of a counter example of where, yeah, we can have all this kind of foolish wisdom, but whether it actually changes things is the question. And my ongoing question, really, an open question. You speak, maybe this brings us quite nicely back to something you said very early on about preferring the idea of liberation over trauma, and liberation seems to be a word. Freedom, what does it mean to be free? And how does the clown energy help us to become more free?
Yeah, thank you. I'd love to come back to that. I just want to say one thing about what you just shared because I think it's very intriguing. There's a part of me when I was in clown school, and I'm still studying with David, but one of the things I was always really curious about was that very idea that you just said about it's an awareness piece. There's an element where I feel like there's a beautiful place for somatics to intersect with clowning in a way that actually could help us not only be in the experience and the practice of clowning and what it can open up to us and reveal, but then having the opportunity to actually cultivate a practice of metabolizing and integrating what we learned from that, which for me involves a lot of somatic practice, raising awareness about even what's happening for me in a moment. There's so many subtle, unconscious, embodied ways that we are experiencing, maybe shutting down or shame or whatever it might be in a moment that we might not even catch. The conscious mind might not even catch on that this is what's happening. Oh, look, this is what's happening right now. Oh, look, there's that pattern. Oh, I know when people look at me like that, this is what happens. And my body takes this shape, or I notice this sensation. That's the beauty of weaving in, of integrating like a like somatic practice or an awareness practice that would actually help us cultivate simultaneously the ability to know ourselves better. So the one ridiculing as much as the one being ridiculed or clowned, the opportunity exists. And of course, in a setting like a corporate environment, you can't necessarily force the boss to do some self-awareness, or understand necessarily what you're doing. But I think as a kind of a liberatory practice, it needs for me to involve both of those elements. The practice itself is so illuminating, as you brought in that I was talking about with Heidi. It really can crack us open. The number of people who were cracked open on the daily in that class was stunning to me. People leaving in tears almost every single time because of something that happened. And there would be some awareness, I think, of, oh, yeah, when we were doing that one practice, like I lost it. But there's this very intricate way in which bringing awareness to what's happening in our bodies can help us illuminate those patterns in ways that help us really truly integrate new meaning in those moments. We really can make new meaning. And I think it over time, progressively, it absolutely changes it can change who we are, right? I don't know if you know this, you hear this guy, Joe Dispenza, talking about breaking the habit of being yourself, right? That's something I've heard people talk about. And I think it is this idea that we become so habituated to even experiencing ourselves in a very particular way. This is just me. This is just how I am. We say personality. This is something I learned from Buddhism. What is personality? If nothing more than how we present to people over time. It's a patterned way of being in the world. Like any pattern, even our neurophysiology, right? We know this from neuroscience now, that we can interrupt even the most entrenched neural pathways. And in their interruption, there's a space to experience something new. And if we're able to see that and understand it and begin to integrate that and recognize that pattern when it starts, we can interrupt it. Clowning is the greatest interrupter that I know of patterns that I've experienced. But the potential then exists for an awareness of that pattern in a way that kind of diffuses its hold, or like loosens its grip on us, right? It creates a little bit more space between us and this very powerful identification we have with it. That's just how I am. I am this. I am that, right? Oh, no, that's a pattern I have. Oh, look, there it is again. Oh, how fascinating. Oh, it just showed up again. Wow, in that situation, it's the same pattern. So, really, for me, I think that's the liberatory potential of the clown. And I think woven alongside some awareness practice of some kind. For me, somatics is a big, important part of that. It can revolutionize our lives. I'm convinced of that.
It can certainly, the liberatory practice and self-awareness can transform the individual. And I guess the bigger question is, can that be scaled up to a societal level? Because we're all, as a world, we're stuck in a pattern and a way of seeing ourselves that's fixed. And can clowning or something else interrupt
I think
that?
so. I definitely think so. Yeah. Because I mean, there's so many ways you could go about doing this, but I had a guest in Rooted last December, and one of the things that she invited us to do, I think this was from a book called Games for Actors and Non-Actors. I don't know if you know this book, something like
I
that.
know that book. Yeah.
Yeah, there was this practice of it basically, and it reminded me of clowning, even it wasn't specifically about clowning, but it was a bunch of different kind of scenarios of like where you had to try to embody the impossible. Like it was like try to stand in the middle of the room and then or like always stand in the middle of the room and never stand in the middle of the room, like a totally impossible task. But it was this invitation to challenge oneself, really just to engage in an experiment that is set up to fail in some way. What I've found, I think, in Rooted is I feel like these kinds of practices in the realm of play and clowning are invitations to people to experience and understand a little bit of what it means to be in the mystery for just a moment, just suspended for a moment what we think we know. And when that's done collectively, I think it does invite us all into a sense of, first of all, our own experience of being in the unknown and what it evokes for us. Because we might find that actually we get quite nervous when we don't know what's happening or what's coming next. And we can work with that. That's a powerful potential right there. But then I think I've seen it happen again in Rooted, where someone's had a shift because of what's played out in the field around a practice that was play oriented or invited people into some unknown or invited in that disruption of how we typically identify ourselves. And there's such incredible wisdom that pours out. And when we share that wisdom, we often find that other people in the group are like, yeah, that I felt that too. Or God, that belongs to humanity. That really belongs to what it means to be human in this world. And it creates a lot of communal bonding, I think. It also gives people a way to maybe be in the realm of the unknown and play with both safety and risk at once. I think there's something very invitational about that in clowning. I think it holds an incredible amount of potential for the collective. It also, there's something I actually talked about in another podcast around the clowning experience and what it invites my ability to kind of practice being vulnerable, practice letting go of more egoic attachments that clowning really invites, so that when I enter different spaces, I have a more heightened awareness of that kind of the relational dynamics that are happening in a room. And what it allows me to do is it allows me to make different choices about how I'm showing up in a space, right? I recognize maybe patterns more, or I can choose not to go with a very particular pattern, or there, I think that alone can have a ripple effect in the collective that is very hard to measure, but very important to say that it makes a huge impact if we see it that way.
It feels like a call to action and an affirmation of what we're doing. Thank you so much for that, Kareen. This feels like a natural place to come to our conversation to come to an end, even though I can see so many threads of conversation that we could continue to have and maybe will at some point. But you've brought, I think, as distinct from some of my guests, a deep understanding of what it's like to be in the clown learning process, actually, because a lot of my guests are either clown teachers or don't really have that much contact with clowning, but you really do. So it's been fascinating having that conversation, and I look forward to finding out more about how you go integrate clowning into your work
Oh,
in,
thank you so
in ongoing
much.
ways.
Thank you, Barnaby. I really appreciate it. It's been really lovely to speak with you about it. I love to share about it. And I will say I'm still terrified of it and I love it passionately.
Beautiful. Good luck with all of your amazing work and stay in touch with us at Clown Spirit.
Thank you.
And thank you.
Really appreciate it.
The goal of these podcast interviews is to draw connections between clown practice and many other practices of healing, mindfulness, creativity, community building out there in the world. And I hope this episode may have provoked some ideas about how you could do that for yourself. If you're interested in finding out more about clowning, one great way to do that would be to attend our conference, Clown Virgins, coming up in April. You'll find the links in the show notes below. As we build towards that, we also have some fantastic podcast guests coming up over the next few weeks, including Jay Virati, talking about his book, Reclaim Your Mind, which is all about how to have a more playful, healthy relationship with technology. Also, Four Arrows, Wahink Peitopa, talking about clowning and indigenous worldviews. And very excited to announce that I'm going to be talking to the celebrated Nigerian academic and activist, the amazing Bayo Akomolafe, himself a great proponent of playfulness and noticing the small, insignificant details. We need things to look forward to right now, and I hope that some of those things I've just listed will tick that box for you. Have a wonderful day, and I look forward to connecting with you at the next Clown Spirit event. Bye for now, and as always, keep clowning.